there, welcome to Wandering DMs. I am Dan, and I'm going to be hosting solo this week. Paul will be back next week. Our show is brought to you with the help of our friends at Describe with a special offer to our viewers, but more on that later. So first of all, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Of course, we are broadcasting here live on Valentine's Day. And for a special holiday event, we thought that it would be fun to have disinvited Brooklyn-based artist Isabelle Garbani back on the show to talk about her research that she's been doing on food and disease in the Middle Ages, because that's what we are like here. So happy Valentine's Day again. And what we did here is we pre-taped this special event in Isabel's kitchen yesterday. And it's a bit of an extended show. It goes about 90 minutes or so. So we hope that you'll enjoy that and stick around for that. As we premiere it live here on YouTube and Twitch, I'll be in the live chat, so I should be able to respond to any questions that you might have along the way, which I'll look forward to. And without further ado, there we go. Love being live. Here's your feature presentation: Eat, Plague, Love. Hope you enjoy it. Isabelle Garbani, welcome to Wandering the M's.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, of course, this is our very special Eat, Plague, Love show. And we're so delighted that viewer Jerry McDonald gave us that wonderful idea for this show.
Brilliant.
So, of course, Isabelle, let's talk about you a little bit. You are a fine artist living in Brooklyn.
That's right. I've heard that I was disinvited, and yet I'm invited again.
Well, as a reminder to viewers, we had Isabelle on in season 1 of Wandering DMs for the Art in D&D show, in which we were mostly focused on art in the 1970s in D&D. And we had a little bit of a dispute on camera over particular artwork. Yep. And Isabelle was officially disinvited from the show.
That's right.
Which we felt bad about, but you've been given a pardon. And Isabelle is now officially re-invited to the show here in season 3 for Eat, Plague, Love. And we
could change again, of course, at the end of the show.
We're looking forward to a very long and productive collegial cooperation with you going forward.
Very good.
So welcome back
Thank you very much
for Wandering DMs. So one thing I'll point out is that in the last year or so, you've pivoted your artwork to food-based art.
That's right.
Why did you do that?
So the past couple of years have been a little rough, and I'm trying to find something new in art. I'm trying to kind of like spark my creativity again, and trying new things. So in the past year, I've actually enrolled in the baking and pastry program at Kingsborough Community College, and you can see here first try at making a sculpture with modeling chocolate. So this is a copy or inspired by the lions in front of the New York Public Library, originally sculpted by Potter. And I made my own. I went on the internet, got a recipe for modeling chocolate, and just made that. And I'm going to make a mold of it and see if I can cast it in chocolate, and we'll see what happens.
That is really impressive. Is like a first attempt at food art. That is really. If I was hiring, I would be like, wow, that's amazing. And of course, you're in the cooking program at Kingsborough, which is part of CUNY here, City University of New York. And cooking program is one of is one of Kingsborough's jewels in the crown. Yeah, pretty well regarded, actually.
Yeah, very good program. Wonderful kitchen. Wonderful professors. Wonderful chefs. Really having a really good time.
Yeah. You should send them a link to this show for extra credit.
I should, actually. I'm a total brown noser.
So this is one of Wandering DM shows, a little bit of a historical dive, actually. So we're going to talk a little bit about historical Middle Ages stuff that you and I weren't totally familiar with before we started digging into this, and we've both done research and we're excited about it. And deeper, or at the end, we'll bring it back to how you can use this in your gaming, in D&D or other role-playing games, and how this could be ideas to feed into your gaming that you might not otherwise think about. So this particular historical dive comes out of you and me both reading parts of what's called the Decameron, which is Middle Ages text, and I think we both found this in a New York Times article.
That's right.
End of last year, I guess, by Michael Snyder called "What We Eat During a Plague."
Right.
But the Decameron, tell us a little bit about what that is.
So the Decameron was written by Boccaccio. I think a year or two after the Black Death was basically over. So he was witness to all of that, and it's believed that he actually wrote it a year after his father died, probably of the plague. So basically 10 young nobles from Florence decide that they're going to leave Florence during the time of pestilence, and they're going to spend some time on their country estate and tell stories to each other. And the 7 women, 3 men, and they each going to tell one story every day, and they're gone for 10 days. They want to get away from Florence, kind of like recharge their batteries, not think about death, not think about terrible news that is happening every day. And so the Decameron is basically all the stories that they tell throughout their stay in the countryside. And some of them are silly, some of them are tragic, some of them are funny, some of them are about love and makes them cry. And in the background of all of that, they're going to spend their time as pleasantly as possible. So they're going to go for walks in the garden, they're going to have good food, and the servants are specifically told not to give them any news about what's going on in Florence. They don't want to hear about death, they don't want to hear about the plague, they don't want to hear about diseases. They just kind of want to, again, like recharge their batteries and kind of relax and have, a pleasant time together.
Interesting. Now, to be clear, the 10 nobles we're talking about, are they real people? Are they fictional people?
I believe they're fictional people
Right.
based on supposedly real people, but the names in the Decameron are completely fictional.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a framing device.
Yeah.
There's a total of 100 stories. So 10
Yeah.
stories times 10 days is a total of 100 stories in there. And it's kind of a framing device for these vignettes that are sometimes silly or sometimes, touching. And a little bit like other stuff like 1001 Nights kind of has
Exactly.
the same framing device of one character who's telling a bunch of stories in an otherwise possibly traumatic situation,
Right.
actually. One thing that comes to my mind around this framing device is must be nice to be in the elites that you can just leave town and go to your country estate and have a bunch
Right.
of servants serve you and protect you and be
Right.
protected from the ongoing problems.
Right. Well, and and actually that's interesting that you say that, because the introduction by Boccaccio,
Right.
he actually, spent a little bit of time giving you the background of what's going on in Florence and how people are reacting to the plague and
Yeah.
who's doing what.
Yeah.
And you find a lot of parallels to what's going on in the pandemic right now. So
Right.
you have people who have money and they have country estates and they leave, So we've had a lot of people, spending the entire pandemic in their
Yeah.
Hamptons house.
Right.
Must be nice,
Right.
just leave New York. You don't have to deal with all the crowd.
Right.
Then you have people who completely ignore the plague. They're going to go have a good time and they're going to, drink and make merry and eat a lot, and, maybe those are the equivalent of the anti-maskers, like people who just are just not going to believe that this is happening. And then you have the rest of us, who just have to kind of deal with it and, try to navigate this whole thing as best as we can. Some people isolate more than others. Some people try to eat better. Some people just go to comfort food. Some people just go to excesses of I'm just going to eat things that are going to make me feel good, like, chocolate and chips and ice cream and whatnot. So, to me, it's kind of interesting that there's this parallel and we haven't really changed, how we behave in a really stressful situation. So the people who can escape can, and the rest of us, deal with it in many, many different ways.
It's funny how we find like I think you and me find, and many of us find these we're living in a historical moment that will be in history books and people will be talking about it for a long time, and we feel that we're a modern society and we're different, and then we go and we touch back to something like stories from the 1918 plague or the Decameron here, which again, we're talking 14th century, I think like 1390s.
The plague was actually 1348.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
right, okay.
That's is when it started in Italy.
Okay.
And then was basically in Europe for about a couple of years.
Right. Okay. So I was only off by about 50 years. Give me a break, right? See, this is why we do it. This is why we'll fix that in post, right? Is that what we do here? No, we don't.
No, there's no one fixing it in post.
Right. Now I've got 2 errors. So anyway, so 1300s, 14th century, and all these experiences and these problems and these responses are all familiar. And then if we read. What you made the tapestry project off of originally. See, I got on the
Gilgamesh.
show. Gilgamesh is what I'm thinking, right? If you read the Gilgamesh story, right, all the emotions and all the problems and all the responses are just like they're totally inside me, right? They're amazingly fresh and human,
right?
And we keep finding these stories really being commentary about us this very day that we're recording this to a surprising degree.
Right.
If someone wants to read the Decameron on their own, where would they go to find that?
So a lot of the research that I did for in preparation for this show, there's a project, and I think I gave you the link. It's called the Decameron Web, and Brown University has started a project I think in the mid '90s. So it's been going on for about 25 years. You can find all the stories there with translation. You can find background on the plague, literary commentary on the Decameron itself, a lot of research about the plague that's actually very new. So, scholars keep adding articles to that, and it's really, really interesting. And it's a very quick read if you want to, and then there are links to, articles and, the actual scholarly research and studies that people have done. So if you want to dig deeper, you can
Cool.
do that too.
Cool.
So just Google Decameron Web from Brown University and you'll find it, and I think you'll put the link online as well.
Yeah, we're talking about a whole bunch of stuff, and as usual I will be putting links in the description in the YouTube archive, so you can just go under the look in the description under the YouTube video that you're currently watching, and you'll see links to the Brown University site for the Decameron. And of course, the Decameron originally written in Italian, medieval Italian, to be clear, right? And then there's a couple translations there actually. There's like a medieval English, and then there's a early 20th century English version, I think that's there. So before we get into the food aspect, which is really the meat and potatoes of what we wanted to get to today. Right? I should have my own show. Let's talk about the storytelling aspect, right? So so the framing device is you're gonna hear 100 stories in this horrible Black Death bubonic plague situation, and they kind of bounce back and forth between describing our characters' food and feast that they're eating and the stories that they're telling. And so obviously it's a terrible situation, right? It's the most terrible situation that's ever happened. In the Black Death, half of everyone in Europe died, right? In just a couple of years, 50% fatality rate for the entire continent, which is almost unimaginable, and maybe something we're not going to get into today. But of course, that completely revolutionized society and economics and what work was like and what the economy was like after that, and that's a whole different show. But one of the largest disasters that's ever befallen people. So it feels at first blush, it feels a little weird to dig into the Decameron and have a bunch of frankly funny, silly stories mostly. Right, a bunch of like jokey. There's a judge that gets de-pantsed. There's a nun that puts her illicit lover's pants on her head by mistake instead of her normal headwear and stuff like that. And so at first blush, it feels jarring that why aren't you paying attention to this the enormity of the situation? And the author, like you're saying in the intro, does have a rather concrete description of what the plague's actually like in Florence. And it's really harrowing. It's actually really harrowing.
Oh, it's very scary.
There's a description of the corpses being dragged out. And what I realized is that it is smashingly like the scene in Monty Python's Holy Grail of the Bring Out Your Dead scene.
Bring Out Your Dead, yeah, exactly.
Which seems, when I first saw it, seems totally over the top.
Right.
Right. Seems like carts through the street, putting half a dozen bodies on.
Right.
That is an actual real description.
Right.
About down to the number of bodies per cart.
Right.
That you get in the introduction of the Decameron. It's really harrowing. And then, like for the Monty Python situation that most of us are familiar with, they turn that into a big joke. I've never seen that event portrayed except as a joke.
Right.
Right. It's too horrible to think about in reality.
Right.
So it's almost like the only way that we can parse that is in jokes and things like that.
Right.
Did that occur to you while you were reading those parts of the Decameron?
Yes and no. I mean, if you've ever gone to a funeral, there's usually a big get together, after the actual, funeral itself.
Right.
And it will invariably turn into people laughing.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel guilty about it, but at the same time, it's very hard to process the finality of death, and this just catastrophic situation that they're into, and there's no cure, and they know there's no cure. Nothing is working. They know that medicine is just not prepared for the calamity that they're dealing with.
And we're talking Black Death specifically.
We're talking about Black Death specifically.
Yeah.
And, if you're talking about COVID, it's the same, it's like we actually don't have a cure for it. We can, make sure that people survive, but we don't actually have a cure for it.
Right.
So, it's very hard to really confront your mortality in this way, and how do you deal with that? Well, laughter is probably going to be the best way you're going to be able to process that. And it's a very strange way to process those events, but I think humanity is just we're just not physically prepared, emotionally prepared to really take that head on. And at the end of the Decameron, they actually are able to tell stories that are sad, and they are able to cry, and they are able to tell stories that are happening in Florence, at the time, so they kind of like very slowly bring it back to what is actually happening. But, the initial state that they have, they don't want to talk about it. They just can't talk about it. Yeah. And maybe we can talk about the humors in medieval medicine, and maybe that could be a segue for that.
Yeah. Let's just put a pin. I totally wanted to get into that, and there'll be a quiz later. But it's a very the storytelling arc in the Decameron is an interesting transition that you're talking about, from start off with really the silliest stuff,
right, and
then transition over it to now we're talking about maybe failed love stories, maybe in the middle, right, and then things that are like cosmically fantastic, places or something like that. And at the end, you're talking about, actual families actually in Florence, not specifically about the plague, but things that are closer to us. And I think that's a bit of an observation we both got from another New York Times article by, who is that, Rivka Galchen, right? Mm-hmm. There's an article by Rivka Galchen about the Decameron, which was really great. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in that article by Galchen was that person has a 6-year-old daughter currently, ongoing through the pandemic in 2020, and among the things that they've seen is that the daughter can't really process the pandemic in concrete terms so much, but what they are doing is the daughter has a bunch of miniature figurines for the kids, right? And they've started putting armor on their figurines with like foil from bubblegum wrappers and stuff like that, and making armor and protective masks and wrapping the figurines in cotton to protect their miniature figures from the plague. And then apparently the daughters also got heavily into a young fiction series called, I hadn't heard of this before, the Wings of Fire series, which is a series about a bunch of dragons working to fulfill a prophecy to end war. Right. And so once again, here's a tough time for young people, and we're turning to stories of fantasy, and apparently the daughter's also making elaborate combat scenarios that the author can't figure out what they're doing is actually part of it.
Right.
And making up your own systems that you kind of have control over, and turning to stories of dragons. And here it is coming back to us all over again.
Right.
Right. For those of us who are deep into fantasy or role playing or D&D or something like that, it's a very, you couldn't feel more close to someone trying to process and trying to survive using those kinds of thoughts.
Right.
So I thought the storytelling arc in the Decameron was very interesting for that purpose.
Right.
It feels very familiar, and it feels like here we are again. Now, to be clear, so now we're about to transition to the food story, which is what we're really where we want to get today. But I failed to mention at the top of the show, we're pre-taping this, right?
Yes.
Because unfortunately you're busy.
I'm waiting for the
on
man
actual
tomorrow.
Show. There you go. But we are planning on broadcasting this show for Valentine's Day 2021. So all of our talk about the plague and death and disease and funerals was our idea for the best possible show that we could do for Valentine's Day 2021.
But, in our defense, Dan made cookies and I bought brownies. So,
yes.
We're not, complete monsters.
Great. Now, I will say, I'm still wearing the official Wandering DMs bloody massacre apron, which is my official garb for Wandering DMs cooking shows.
Yeah.
This is the second one, I will say. In season 2 of Wandering DMs, we had a show on food in which I made the Wandering DMs famous white gold cookie recipe. So there'll be a link, right? There's a link in the description here to go back and see that episode for Wandering DMs white gold cookie recipe.
That's right.
I didn't make that today. I just made normal chocolate chip cookies.
Right.
And again, a small number of humanoids were severely injured, and unfortunately I bloodied the apron all over again. I apologize for that. At some point, hopefully, you can get a copy of this on the Wandering DMs merch site. But at the moment, in the future, it's not available right now.
Right.
So anyway, so we do have a variety of foodstuffs that we can enjoy here today. So a lot of us, I think part of what this was on our mind about was a lot of us, our diet has changed radically.
Right.
In the last year.
Right.
And that's true for you and me because of the pandemic, and we don't go out as much. And when it first hit, we were in different cities when it first hit here in New York, and so I was on my own here, and there was a week or two where the grocery shelves were basically empty.
Right.
Didn't think I'd read about it growing up. Seen that as a foreign country kind of thing to happen. Thank God we live in America. And then March of 2020 comes, and I actually do go to the grocery store, and the shelves are in fact 2/3 empty.
Right.
And all the stuff that I normally get, I can't get that particular day.
Right.
Didn't last that long, fortunately, but that was an interesting moment to experience. But I'm going to have to literally change my diet here in the grocery store pretty radically.
Right.
So thinking about the Middle Ages,
mm-hmm.
what were the main thoughts about the Middle Ages, about diet and health,
mm-hmm.
and how different or the same are they with how we think today? Okay.
So I think we can't really talk about food without talking about again the four humors that's basically steeped into medieval medicine. Right. So basically the idea is that your body has to be in balance. You have four humors that are basically completely taken out of the Greek texts of the four elements and kind of put into their own sauce of the medieval ages. Christianity is trying to establish itself. They're reading the ancient texts, but they kind of want to put their stamp on everything. So, the four elements become the four humors.
Wow.
So you have black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood, right? And that corresponds to the four elements.
Let's talk about that a little bit more depth, if that's okay.
Sure.
So it's amazing that the medieval conception of the body and what you ought to eat comes directly from Aristotle's elements, and so I think each one was correlated with wet or dry and hot or cold.
That's
So
right.
maybe, can you tell me which one is which?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to read my notes
Right.
because I always forget. So black bile is actually cold and dry,
Right.
and it's associated with earth.
Yep.
Yellow bile is associated with warm, dry, so it's fire. Phlegm. I'm sorry, is cold and wet, and that's water. And then blood is associated with warm and wet, and that's air.
You passed the quiz. So Isabel gets 100% on the quiz about bodily humors versus Aristotle's elements. Wonderful.
Right.
Well
And
put.
so all of these have to be in balance. If you have any kind of imbalance between those four things, and they're each associated with a particular organ in your body and with a particular emotion.
Okay.
So it's not just a physical self, but it's also an emotional self.
Okay.
That, keeping everything in balance, not just your body, your physical well-being, but your emotional well-being is going to be very important. So black bile is associated with depression. So if you have too much black bile, you're going to be depressed. If you have too much yellow bile, you're going to be angry. Okay. If you have too much phlegm, you're going to be more reserved and timid. And if you have too much blood, you're going to be a little bit more too active, too enthusiastic. Okay. So all of those things, are really important.
Can you have all four at the same time? Can you can you have a hyper amount of all four all simultaneously?
I don't see why not.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. All
Why
right.
not? I don't know. I'll have to read my medieval text and get back to you on that. But what's interesting about all of this is that food are also associated with, those four humors. So particular foods also have particular qualities of, cold, dry, warm, dry, cold, wet, and warm, wet. Okay, so depending on what your body is doing and depending on what kind of imbalance that you have, particular foods are going to help you rebalance the humors.
Give me a specific example.
I'm going to give you a specific example because at the time when the plague hit. So when the plague hit was really fascinating. So they don't know why it's happening, and there's all kinds of discussion about why it's happening. But what they do know is that it's a contagious disease. They are aware of the fact that it's something that's contagious. Okay. All right. So it's a real disease. We don't know why it's happening. We don't know how to cure it. But it can spread if you're near someone or if you smell putrid air. It's going to affect you. Also, they think that if you are close to body, so if you have warm, moist imbalance, so if you're too warm, too moist, you are more likely to get the plague. Okay, so there's a Compendium de Epidemia that's written in 3048 that's basically going to give you a plague diet. To kind of, so it's not going to cure the plague, but it's hopefully going to prevent you from getting the plague. All right. So it's going to be a lot of cold, dry elements to kind of rebalance and counteract the warm, moist body that's more likely to get the plague. Okay. So I'm going to read some of it because I think it's kind of interesting. And so each food is associated with an element. And so you're gonna, for us, it doesn't necessarily make logical sense, but at the time it does. So the plague diet, basically, you have to avoid all fruit. You have to roast your meat and cook it with spices. So the idea is that if you roast your meat, it's going to become dry cold. Okay. You are going to drink vinegar and something called verjuice, which is unripe grape juice.
Okay, let me just back. You drink vinegar.
Drink
vinegar. Have a big heaping cup of vinegar.
A big heaping cup of vinegar. So the idea is that with your meal, you might have a glass of vinegar. Okay.
Okay.
And vinegar is considered cold and dry.
Okay.
It's a liquid, but it's considered cold and dry liquid. Okay. So a lot of people not only drink vinegar with their meal, but they also wash the entire homes with vinegar. And they will also go around putting vinegar on a little piece of cloth and have it on their face, so that they avoid smelling the putrid air, and get infected that way.
I mean, isn't that currently don't people still do that in cases of like public protests where they might have to deal with tear gas or stuff like that? I feel like I've seen.
That's possible.
I think
Yeah,
I've seen
that's
like I think I've
possible.
seen people like take cloth and vinegar in
Right.
order to like.
But
counteract that.
vinegar is considered a really great cleaning products if you want to have
Yeah.
green products in your home.
Yeah.
A lot of people actually wash their their kitchen with vinegar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that so it's kind of interesting that way that we still have some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of if you look at traditional Chinese medicine too, there is a lot of stuff that you can do to kind of rebalance the body to avoid getting sick, right? So everything is about keeping balance, and food and what you eat, what you drink, and how you feel is going to really affect your physical well-being and how well you can fight diseases. Okay, and that's still practiced a lot today.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. You also had to eat sugar, which was extremely expensive because of course that had to be imported.
So something for the nobility.
Something for the nobility.
They do it a lot easier.
So and a lot of that, obviously, people who are the common folks, can't afford. They can't afford spices. All those are important from the Middle East and North Africa and Asia.
Right.
They don't really eat a lot of meat. They don't really have the money to really buy the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And Boccaccio's introduction actually talks about how expensive all the food is getting. So there's like hyperinflation. There's no one working the field. Everybody's dead.
Yep.
Right. So there's actually food shortages, and therefore food is becoming extremely expensive. And actually, probably for the first time, the nobility is also, coming up with those food shortages, just like we were in March.
Yeah.
Like everybody's confronted with that, that there's just basically no food available because no one is working the fields.
Which feels like, so obviously now we have industrialized agriculture and a lot of it's mechanized. But as you say that right now, it feels like a whisper of the frontline workers being grocery workers for us in 2020. And if they get sick, nobody's going to get food. And the rather large problem of protecting them properly, where all of a sudden that became like the most important people working for us. Right. And obviously the Black Death situation is 100 times worse than that.
Sure. But if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there were big outbreaks in meatpacking plants.
Right. Yep.
Right. And so, everybody got sick.
Yep.
Nobody was really protecting their workers properly.
Yep.
And, all of a sudden, no meatpacking plants because nobody can work. You do need skills. And if everybody's sick, it's not like you can replace people very easily. Right. So we did come up with some shortages as well, some food shortages.
I meant to mention this to you completely separately early this morning, but there's a news story today of that there's a legal fight between the New York Attorney General and Amazon right now about whether Amazon is properly protecting their workers in warehouses at the moment. And there was an announcement of a lawsuit in the reverse direction, actually, of Amazon attempting to prevent the New York Attorney General from enforcing the law, as a matter of fact.
Right. I think from my personal experience, I can tell you the answer.
Okay. We're not gonna. Anyway, we're not gonna get into here.
Right now.
We're not gonna get into here.
We're not getting into politics right now.
Right. That was me. That was an opinion only from Dan Collins. Nobody else. And I have nothing to do with.
Yeah. So anyway, so this is the plague diet that's basically prescribed to the people who can afford it. Right. But and how like I said, how you cook your food is going to be is going to affect the particular humors. So what I thought was interesting when I was doing some research too is that there was also the belief that depending on who you are, so if you're the nobility or if you're a common folk, your body actually doesn't need the same thing.
Crazy.
Right?
Okay.
So if you're a refined person and, you're noble or whatever, your body actually doesn't need the same thing as a common folk. So if you're a laborer and you're coarse and, kind of brutish, your food should be that. So, you should
coarse
have
and simple and
coarse
brutish.
and simple
Right.
and brutish. But if you're from the nobility, everything is going to be more refined. Things are going to be, chopped up in little pieces, and it's going to be a very different diet. And obviously you can afford it. You
Right.
can't afford the spices and the meat and all of that.
Right. Didn't I hear you say something the other day, like the peasants were expected to eat things from the dirt, like potatoes and turnips, and the elite the nobility were expected to eat things from the aerial realms, like fowl and bird?
Well, okay, there's a couple of things. So potatoes haven't arrived yet.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
Okay. Right.
So, no, that was a discussion with my father, because when
I always forget. Frankly, I always forget that. So, as someone from an Irish descent, an Irish American family, I like
Potatoes
didn't
have
have
always been
potatoes. What are you talking? What? How did you live? What are you talking about?
No, what the discussion that I had with my father is when potatoes were introduced, because they grow underground, nobody wanted to eat them because they were close to hell. Because they grew underground,
great.
right?
Living on the edge.
Yeah, living on the edge. Yeah. But I think it was in the article, in that first New York Times article, What We Eat During a Plague, where he was actually, the author was actually mentioning that if you were, again, the difference between the two diets, if you were from the nobility, you would eat, games and fowls, like things that were, light and from the air. And if you were, a peasant, if you were a dirty peasant, you ate something that was closer to the ground.
Right.
So and in my research, I haven't confirmed or denied that.
Understood.
So, so I don't know. But what's interesting is when I was doing this research, so the nobility eats, bread made from wheat, right? And that tends to be a whiter bread. And then the peasants are eating, bread that's made from millet and rye and something else. If I can look at my barley, right? And what's interesting is that now there's like a resurgence of what's called ancient grain, right? And so we're looking at things other than wheat to make bread and looking at the nutritional value. And actually, rye, barley, and millet are actually considered, part of the ancient grain family, and they have way more nutrition than wheat. Especially if if the flour is very white, it doesn't have as much nutrition. And there's actually, and we'll put a link in, unfortunately the video is in French, but there is a baker in France that actually is growing 8,000-year-old grain and milling that himself, and is making bread that basically has all the nutrients that you need. Great. And people will come from like 50 miles, to buy his bread on Sunday, because it's not only delicious, but it's also has very little gluten and has a lot of nutrition. So what's interesting?
25 kilometers, by the way. No, 100 kilometers.
No, 100 kilometers.
God.
Yeah. Well,
See, I'll cut that out of post. Nope. Anyway, but the point about the live to tape. But the point about the ancient grains to get like the full nutrition content is really an amazing. Again, of course, I love that commitment to digging into the historical simulation, reenactment, of course.
Right.
And, as a little aside, like I actually would I've actually pursued, breads with that kind of advertising, actually. And the problem is they always throw flaxseed into it. Right. And unfortunately, it's the one and only thing that I'm actually allergic to, which shocks everybody that hears that, any doctor that hears that. But unfortunately, I'm allergic to flaxseed, and they always throw that in. So I generally can't. I haven't found one of those ancient grain breads that I can actually have to date.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is, it's they're very expensive too.
Yeah.
So the plants themselves are much more fragile than wheat, so you can't really mechanize the whole cultivation process.
Okay.
And they don't yield as much.
Okay.
So for the same amount of land, you're gonna have a lot less flour.
Right.
You're gonna be able to mill a lot less flour.
Okay.
So it's on a large scale, it's not possible, and it will cost you more money.
Well, it's interesting to think about because, of course, you talk about food and agriculture, the modern era, and at some point the conversation comes around to a monoculture.
Right.
Is as people have identified a crop that grows more abundantly and they can make a better profit out of, they have concentrated on just that one crop. And unless I'm misinformed, I mean, all bananas now are all clones, all have exactly the same DNA from some one banana some number of years ago.
And they're all dying. They all have the same disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have they're fragile. On the one hand, as long as it works well, they're the most profitable thing. You've optimized maximal profit. Right. But on the other hand, they're fragile in the sense if you get a disease that hits that one thing, it could wipe out the whole crop.
Done. Right.
So does it sound like if you went to a medieval village cropland, they'd have a much larger variety of different plants there?
That I can't. Again, I can't. I was trying to find information on that, and unfortunately, it's not a field of study that a lot of people are super interested in. It's not like this very sexy thing. Like, so I can't really confirm that.
Jeez, you didn't complete your research for this
episode?
I
didn't complete the research, I know.
Anyway.
No, I just couldn't find the information that I was looking for. Oh, I think I'm disinvited. Because again, the baker I was talking about in France, what he's growing is an 8,000-year-old wheat plant. Yeah. It's called einkorn, I think is. I'm not sure if I'm butchering the name.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, it's einkorn. Okay. So it's called la petite épeautre in French. So, and I'm not sure how widely it was used in the Middle Ages. I'm not sure. Like, I don't think they had the monoculture that we have now. There's probably a lot more variety by region. Yeah. But I'm not sure like how far they were from that particular ancient grain. Yeah. But my suspicion is that actually so we talk about the peasant diet being mostly bread, but I think the bread was actually better than the bread, better for you than the bread that we eat now.
Gotcha. As long as we're thinking about food and how things evolve over time, I mean, one of the things that I think of is because I grew up on a farm in rural Maine. And we had wild strawberries just in the field. So we'd go out and hang delicious. And, it wasn't grown. We weren't intentionally trying to grow it, just they grew there naturally. But they were tiny. They're tiny. Right? They were teeny tiny. They were smaller than my little fingernail, like quite a bit. They were teeny tiny little things. And, I guess I'm of the age that I go to the grocery store and the strawberries in the grocery store have grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And now I go in the grocery store and I'm like, there's some kind of Frankenstein monster strawberry sitting in front of me. Right. And, they get a little bit less flavorful over time. Oh, it's like sure. As they get inflated like that, they actually get less inflated. And so I try to avoid the big giant fruit and try to find smaller stuff, frankly. Right. And I go in the grocery store, and there are days when I think about the intense level of flavor that the teeny tiny little natural strawberry had that you don't get. But again, it's corporatively profitable, and it looks like you're being impressed by, look at how big our fruit is.
Sure, and also they're growing out of season. Nobody buys locally. It's and if you do want to go back to that, and again, it's an expense issue. Right. Because if I want to just cook food that's grown locally and in season. Right. First of all, I'm gonna have to really think about my menu. It's gonna be a little bit harder.
Yes, that's true.
And it's gonna cost me a lot more money.
Right. And you're gonna have to adjust it every season. So you're gonna have to adjust now it's spring and it's fall, and what am I doing now?
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. But if we have a lot of green markets around New York, and if you go buy local. Locally grown strawberries, which are basically just available in June. Right. They're going to taste a lot better, but they're going to cost you probably twice as much. Yeah. So, it's just kind of like, where are your priorities?
I stumbled into this. I actually just stumbled into this yesterday, actually, because I went out to shop, and actually what I initially planned for last night was to make stuffed shiitake mushrooms, right? And I go in the store, it's like, well, that's not in season. We don't have that. Right. Dumb,
Right.
I should have thought of that.
Right. Right.
And as part of like modern society, we assume everything's on tap.
Right.
I can go to Amazon and I can order anything that I want, anytime that I want, right? And I can pull up any media, any product, any digital book that I want, and that the natural world doesn't work like that.
Right. Right.
And sometimes I forget.
Right. So let's go back to medieval dieting a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So when I was researching this, again, between the reactions that we're having with COVID and some of the stuff that we've actually inherited from medieval times, I think there's this belief that the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages, where it was ignorant, and it's like we've come so far from how they lived, and I think that there's still a lot of commonality that that I found that was kind of like really interesting.
Right.
So one of the things that I, when I was researching like medieval diet outside of the disease, outside of what was happening with the plague, is that they actually felt like digestion was still part of the cooking process, right? Oh. So food was not, food didn't stop cooking, up until, you finished digesting it. And so there's a connection between the food and your body that we've actually inherited some of the processes that they had in eating food.
Some of the cooking processes.
Some of the eating processes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, they thought that you had to start the meal by opening up your stomach, and you had to close the meal by shutting down your stomach.
Okay.
So you open the stomach and you close the stomach, and you open the stomach with an apéritif, okay, and you close the stomach with a digestif. Okay, so digestive and then an aperitif. I don't know. It's like it's cocktail hour basically.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So if you have a very traditional French meal, you will serve an aperitif. So it's going to be a cocktail with maybe a little finger food for your guests, and you're going to close it with a digestif, which is going to be a really strong liqueur like a cognac or Armagnac or something like that, or a pear liqueur, and that's how you're going to end the meal. And then how the meal is served is going to go from very light coarse to very heavy. So you're going to start with a soup, maybe it's going to be followed by a fish, then a white meat, then a dark meat, then the cheese, then the dessert, right? So, and all of this is actually how people ate at a medieval table. And again, I'm talking about the nobility, not the people who were just having bread and gruel, But, I thought it was very interesting that the way the meal was constructed is actually still the way a traditional French meal is served, and I've spent many hours, probably too many hours at Sunday meals at my grandparents' place, where that was basically the meal, and it lasted like 3 or 4 hours, right? And you just had light meal.
Okay,
and
so
the cat.
Unfortunately, our cat can't get into where he. Speaking of eating,
the cat can't get his food.
Unfortunately, can't get into his normal buffet zone. Actually, let me just help out.
How about help the guy out, Okay. Have your food.
That problem is solved.
Have your medieval food. Now he doesn't want it anymore. He's not interested.
He'll discover it. So I apologize for cutting off the thought, but you're saying that the structure of a modern day French meal comes right out of medieval 14th century or earlier practices.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading that, I'm like, my God, this is exactly what the Sunday meals were like.
Right.
And nobody would serve like a red meat before they would serve fish. That's just unheard of. Ça ne se fait pas.
Right, that's a +1 point.
So I just thought it was kind of interesting, that we've inherited, some medieval tradition about how we eat, and it has nothing to do really with your health or like the thought of it's more with the taste rather than, with your physical well-being, but, the fact of the matter is, that's how the meal was structured. And then the other interesting thing that was a parallel between then and now. So, and we're going to put some links on medieval cookbooks that I found. And there was one medieval cookbook called Le Viandier. And basically the cookbook, and it's not, you're not going to really find like recipes of like, cooking time and temperatures and, how many ingredients you need. It's more of like
not that you had an oven at the time to set to 325, right?
Right. You didn't have it. Yeah,
it was like, here's some stuff we put together.
Stuff, put it in the fire.
Right.
And
watch it.
Yeah, and make sure that it's okay. Here comes the cat.
Here's our cat yelling. There are other shows where you see his tail kind of cross in front of. So maybe you should come over here, buddy. You can come right over. Your buffet is available over there. I feel like. Wonderful. So glad we had a guest shot.
Nice little guest shot.
Like
So the book, basically talks about how to basically cook the meal. But there's also a big section on how you present the meal, how you're going to plate, the actual meal that you're making. Right. And if you think about, us going to restaurants and doing fine dining, that's a huge part of the food industry now. That's a huge part of the restaurant industry. Right. How you're going to present the food. If you go to McDonald's, it's going to be in a little, paper box, and that's fine. That's, you pay $3 for that. That's what you expect. But if you're going to pay, $40 for an entree, you want it to have like a really special presentation. So the meaning, we're still kind of like in the same zone, the same medieval zone in how we want to enjoy our food, how we want to actually have the experience of eating. So, I thought that was just kind of a very interesting little tidbit. In that book.
Of course, it's funny that you picked that out because, of course, you and I have had an experience of our mutual sensibilities evolving over time.
Right.
Is that me as an American and again, one from a very rural location of like, the food's on a plate.
Here's
Kabam, right? Kablam. Yeah. It's like off the barbecue. Bam. It's on a food on a plate in a pile. Great. And when we started to have dinners together, like you were constantly commenting on, well, what's the presentation like? How are things located, and what's the overall design, and what's the presentation like? And I had never thought of that before, but of course, now. It being just a tiny little bit OCD now, that's on my mind all the time, frankly, and I'm glad that it is. As a matter of fact, it's like I think that maybe maybe had a little bit of an instinct for that I wasn't allowed to express. But of course, like even these cookies, right? So Isabel took the cookies and the brownies and laid them out in a hexagonal pattern, right? I didn't ask for that. I don't know if you realize how perfect that is for our gaming show. And I'm like, I wouldn't have thought of that myself, but I'm so glad the cookies are in a hexagonal shape. That's awesome. So it's something that we talk about, that you talk about, I should say, a lot. Right. And it's funny that you're seeing it there in that cookbook, which of course was, I think, for upper class dining, right?
Oh, of course.
Middle Ages French,
right?
For the royalty,
right?
And the other cookbook that you spotted was The Form of Curie,
right? Which is in English, so that because I think Le Viandier, you said we couldn't find it in English.
Yeah, I couldn't. I didn't try very hard, but
anyway. The other one is in English, so you can actually get a better sense of like what medieval cooking was like.
Right. And the Form of Curie, the English medieval language book is from 1390. That's where I got the 1390 date from.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
I was thinking about this cookbook actually that was written by the master cooks of King Richard II.
Oh, very good.
Right. So again, Middle Ages technology. So not 3 milligrams of this and 2 cups of that, and for 35 minutes.
And and as a matter of fact, a lot of people didn't have their own kitchen,
right.
Or definitely not their own oven.
Yep.
So an oven, probably would have been part of the Bakers Guild. So you could go and bring, maybe you brought like a certain number of flour, and they would make the bread for you, or maybe you brought the dough. So most people didn't really have a cooking kitchen like you think about
Interesting.
now.
Yep.
Definitely not an oven. It's a fire hazard.
Interesting.
All the houses are made of wood, so it's like a very special place that
Okay.
highly qualified people are tending.
Okay.
You might have it, a fireplace, and so most of the food might be cooked over the
Right.
fire on the fireplace.
Right.
So things that are more like roasted or in big pots that you can hang over the fire. So your cooking is kind of limited. What you can do if you're more of like the lower class.
See, that's a detail that I would want in my D&D world, right? So that's a kind of detail that I like learning about this kind of history and including it, describing the mundane parts of the world where there's normal people living in a normal village and there's not a lot of monsters rampaging around. We haven't seen people casting fireballs. And I want to include that kind of detail because I feel like I learned more about the real world. And if I can share that with my players, maybe it's a surprise, maybe it's not.
Right.
That you didn't have an oven analog in your house and you had to go elsewhere.
Right.
I would want to include that surprise in my world. And it's funny because again, as things have evolved, I guess now we're starting to talk about bring this around to how you would use this in gaming.
Right.
I saw someone on social media the other day ask the question: in your D&D world, do houses have refrigeration?
Right.
And to you and me, that's not something I would think, or I would assume it would be a mistake or an anachronism. And you can set a dial. Is your world totally fantastical and it has
Right.
steampunk refrigeration? I don't know. You can do that, but I think you and I both kind of like a game where the mundane world is very, very much like a medieval world.
Right.
And the more of an opportunity we get to dig into that, the more we learn about the real world.
Right. Right.
So that's that. So I would want to use that kind of detail in my
Sure.
my descriptions of the normal parts of my world, frankly.
Right. Right.
Which again sets up a contrast for the fantastical parts look more fantastical because of it.
Right. Right.
Would be my theory. So the idea that among the things you're talking about with the food and to bring it into like the disease and how I'm always thinking about how the cat climbs on top of unexpected places.
You can't see the cat, but he's actually getting very, very close to our technical setup.
And he has an opportunity to get on a counter that he's never gotten before. Yowie. That's really not a great idea. So
and he's
can
gonna
come back over here.
He's going to come back on camera.
Yeah, that's fine. Great. What a wonderful co-host. And he's also going to climb up on me now. Such a great coach. So among the things you're talking about there is the belief that a lot of contagion, plagues, were delivered in the air.
Right.
Which I think is so. Here's one of these words that I've seen a million times, and I've never said it out loud until right now. The Miasma Theory of disease, that it all came from diseased air, and so now he's on the stove. That's
okay.
fine. He'll hunt around behind us. And so for what it's worth, like I actually like in my D&D game, like for things that are disease based now, I always make the saving throw versus breath.
Right.
To kind of echo the fact that maybe in my game world, disease actually is being distributed through the miasma, and that it's air and it's your breath and things like that. So I like use a saving throw for breath. And the disease, is something that I wrestle with a lot trying to get into my games. And I feel like as we talk about the Black Death, the bubonic plague, and how incredibly important it was for this period of medieval history, mid-1300s, that's about where, like, you take an average of everything you see in classic D&D, it feels like it's kind of 1300s-ish maybe. And I kind of want, disease effects in my game, but I kind of struggle with how the best way to present it, to the players or when it pops up or things like that. So... And then again, as we talk sometimes about the struggle between the true original creators of D&D, there's different sensibilities there. The first disease rules, and I think these are things that you and I have discussed before. The first disease rules were written by Dave Arneson in the Blackmore supplement to original D&D. And there, originally, it's all actual real-world diseases. And
Gotcha.
in classic Arnesonian style, it's very complicated. Pardon me, it's complicated numbers and things like that, and that's the kind of thing Dave Arneson would do. But it was all a list of maybe about 20 real-world diseases with specific triggers or places or things like this is the kind of thing you get from a swamp and this kind of thing you get from fleas. A number of them noted food, right? So
Gotcha.
a number of them specifically said if you get contaminated food or bad food or you're in a food limited situation, right? This is one of the diseases that you need to check against right now. And that would include, what was it, dysentery, cholera, typhus, and typhoid fever were the things that were specifically food related.
Gotcha.
And as we, and if you got in that situation, then there's a percentage chance you need to roll against it. You've got cholera or dysentery or typhus or typhoid fever or something like that. When you move forward a couple years later to first edition AD&D and Gary Gygax is writing, he takes out the names of the specific diseases. He turns them into these abstract grab backs of effects. And so you're supposed to roll monthly. He even more briefly says food could be a factor. Like that's more words than he uses. Like factors could be contagious people or bad places or dirt or filth or food. That's all he says on the issue. And you get a grab bag of random issues of like, you have something affecting your throat or your eyes or your limbs or your joints. And it's severe or bad or acute or chronic or something like that. And you don't get the actual names. Nowadays, the diseases that you see in D&D are all fantastical. They're all fictional, right? And that started, like, I think in 3rd edition is the first time I saw that. Okay. So nowadays, in modern 5th edition D&D, the example diseases that you could possibly run into include sewer plague or sight rot or cackle fever, stuff like that. Totally, made up fantastical things. And when we talked about that before, you asked the question like, well, why did they do that? You've got actual diseases, and Arneson wrote about them, and you kind of have this many of us have this immediate recognition factor. Right. If I said, the plague,
you know what you're going to get.
Right. I would assume I'd get a jolt out of players, which as a DM, I kind of want.
Right.
Why would they do that? And my stab at the time was, maybe the real world diseases are triggering. Right? Maybe that's actually like a trigger issue, and you either have loved ones or you've suffered from one of these real diseases. And maybe we don't want that to pop up in our entertaining game anymore. The second thing I thought, of course, was now it's an IP issue, is that you've invented a brand new fictional thing, and now it's intellectual property that the game company can possibly own uniquely and profit from. Right. But that ties back to the first item. Ties back to you have the worst possible thing happening in the Black Death. The stories will tell maybe start with the most fantastical, crazy, silly stuff we possibly can have, right? And so maybe the hardcore diseases maybe people don't want to hear about in their games anymore, and they want silly, fantastical, made up stuff. Maybe
that's possible.
Yeah,
that's possible.
It's not my first instinct in the game. I prefer to have stuff that's concrete, immediately recognizable, even if you're not You come to it, you've never played D&D before, and I say, you've caught dysentery, right? Or you've got yellow fever, and you at least have some kind of instinctive cultural recognition that that's bad. Sure. Without needing to know as people call it now, the lore of D&D to know that cackle fever is a bad thing. Right.
But I think... I think different players and different DMs are gonna have different sensibility, and I think there's a wide range, and I think that's perfectly fine. Your players, what they want and what they don't want. But I want to kind of like bring it back to 1348 because I think that is something that could be used in a game, about diseases that I think is kind of interesting. So again, they don't know why the plague is happening, and there's 3 different theories as to why it's actually happening, that they feel is completely, they're not contradiction, like they're completely wildly different theories, but they don't contradict each other in the medieval mind. So the first explanation as to why it's happening is that it's a punishment from God. We've been bad. It's a punishment from God, and we need to clean up our society, and this is what we get as a punishment for not being good Christians. The second theory is that it's just the alignment of the stars, and they're aligned in such a way that it's just going to bring a catastrophic event, right? So there's nothing you can do about it. The stars are the way they are, and something horrible is going to happen, and it just so happened it's the plague. And then the third explanation is that there's been some sort of earthquake or some sort of natural event that has released putrid air, and that's what's contaminating Europe.
Right.
And that's why the disease is actually progressing and killing people. So those are the three theories that I think, obviously they're not scientific in any way, but I think, that's something that could be really interesting to use in a game in terms of like rolling for whether or not you get a disease, whatever disease you want to choose, whether it's real life or not. And in that, I actually want.
And I agree. I think those are great places to put your hat on that. Yeah.
Right. Sometimes reality is like so much better than fiction.
I agree.
So instead of doing like this monthly, whether or not you get a disease, well, do whether or not there's an earthquake, and if there's an earthquake, maybe it releases bad gases that causes some sort of disease. Right. But can I say actually why the plague started?
For real.
Tell me. Because I think that's interesting too, right? So the Mongolian army is laying siege to the town of Kaffa, which is in the Crimean Peninsula.
Right.
And their soldiers are getting sick. So the siege is not going very well. They know they're not going to be able to actually take the city. They know that they have some sort of contagious disease. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to treat it. It's the plague.
Spoiler
alert.
Spoiler to the 14th century.
So they decide to leave, but before they do that, they take some of their corpses that have died of the plague and they catapult them inside the walls of the city because they know they're going to contaminate the people inside the city, and they do.
As you do.
And so as those, so they leave, and the people from the city starts, back to Italy. Some of the soldiers go back to Italy, and slowly that disease actually, makes its way up the Italian peninsula.
Wow.
But that's how it actually started. So, and that's actually kind of interesting too. You can catapult something, and send, maybe if you want to be gruesome, you can catapult a corpse. Yeah. You can catapult something else, like maybe a dirty rag. But so the origin of this of the disease itself, and how the origin of the pandemic, is in itself kind of interesting, and it's something that you can probably also use in a game, as to why a disease is starting. So it's an event that's happening, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, that probably nobody's really aware of, and yet. It's going to affect, a couple of years later, it's going to affect everybody in Europe. So.
Yeah, I wrestle with, those are great thoughts. And I think those are great things to reflect on, like how you could use, what, or I guess, what Paul would say, like, what's the purpose of this? What is the purpose of disease in your game? And, I've wrestled often between the Gygaxian, there's a percent roll every month, any particular person gets a disease.
Right.
That's it. Versus the Arnisonian, you need to go to a particular place in a particular situation, and then you might possibly get a disease. Right. And I think the gamist side would be there needs to be a particular reward that you're gauging the risk and reward of, do I get the magic thing, and is it possibly disease me? Versus the simulationist end of there's just disease in the world and anybody could possibly get it. And maybe a middle ground between that is maybe one of these events.
Right.
Maybe, for a simulationist like me, I might roll on a monthly basis to see if there is a plague epidemic that hits the whole town, right? And then it's a situation where the whole party everybody playing the game all is aware of it and all has to deal with it all at the same time, maybe.
Right.
Or, maybe like if you're playing an adventure like Death Frost Doom, where there's one particular trigger that could possibly release it from the dungeon to the rest of the world.
Right.
And then the rest of the world's all contaminated until you find some way of dealing with that.
Right.
So maybe one of those like big groundbreaking events, whether it's from a divinity or astrology or an earthquake or somebody delving too deeply where they really shouldn't go.
Yeah, nosing around in a dungeon
Yeah.
and opening, something that they shouldn't open.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And our experience in the last year, and again, we're filming this 2021, and we're at the point where, to touch back to something we said earlier on, we're at the point where vaccines are being rolled out. I only know one person who's gotten it so far.
Right.
Most people we know haven't gotten it, and you were looking today try to find a scheduled event, and couldn't find one.
Right. Now I've been looking for a month and I can't find anything.
And so having grown up with the D&D, the first edition D&D rules of just there's a flat percentage chance any month anyone in the world gets a disease, but that's not how it happens.
Right.
Right now we know that there are these waves of pandemic.
Right,
where it gets released and it exponentially grows, and we're all thinking about it, and we all have to deal with it. And it's a worldwide community event, that we're all thinking about, and it's not a flat, uniform distribution around the world all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's not like a monthly event that you're gonna, those are, like a pandemic is gonna be pretty rare.
Right.
So I think you have to have like some sort of trigger, to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably, in my opinion, roll to see if Mercury's aligned with Jupiter. And then if that happens, then maybe there's a chance of a catastrophic event happening.
You're not going to set up like an astrological chart with constellations in a computer program tracking it for your campaign world from year to year with a unique calendar system. You're not going to do that. You'd have to be crazy. You'd have to be crazy. You'd have to be crazy to do that.
Right.
But I like it. I like it. The stories say that this is a world that's kind of brutish and kind of short, and it's kind of tough, and it's kind of special if you manage to survive it. And diseases rolling around is part of the story that I kind of want to be in my game, frankly.
Right.
So we're going. So this is a little bit longer than a normal Wandering DM show.
Sure,
actually.
but we knew that was going to happen.
There's one thing at the end that I wanted to get to, and that is that the Decameron talks about games.
Yes, right.
Talks about games as one of the options. So again, the nobles are escaping from Florence.
Right.
They're going to their country estate to get away from it and not think about it, and. So we know about where this is going, so I'm going to read the specific quote here.
Right. Can I actually say something in their defense, actually?
Yeah.
So the idea of them going to their country estate, again, going back to the humors, they're trying to rebalance their emotional state too, in order to have better physical health.
Okay.
Right? So they are trying to avoid melancholia. They're trying to avoid having excess black bile and being depressed. So the idea is not just that they're, escaping, but they also need to have, a very quiet time, very pleasant, and kind of rebalance their emotion that will rebalance their physical health. So.
And I'll say this is something that, like, growing up, like, in considering myself, I'm a rationalist, and I only like logic and da. This is something that I actually kind of resisted.
Right.
But now I understand that and not that it's a silver bullet either. You can't actually resolve a disease just by feeling good about it.
Right.
But your emotional positive attitude makes a big difference.
It does.
And when I've dug into things like outdoor survival and trying to simulate wilderness survival in my games, I'd see over and over again everybody admits that grit and resolve to live no matter what is the fundamental essence between managing to live a bunch of weeks and not. Right. And so that the mental attitude towards these things does make a big difference.
It does.
Right.
And
it's not the only thing, but it makes a big difference.
Right. And I think we're talking about that more during COVID as well.
Right.
I think it's been very clear, to people that, your mental health and your physical health,
Right.
Are really connected,
Right.
and people being isolated or having a much harder time, if you're losing those connections, and that you're more likely, to get sick.
Yeah.
So, your physical health is going to suffer if your mental health is suffering.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So this
I'll let you
So
conclude.
this is line, and this popped out to both of us, right? So this popped
Right.
out to both. We wanted to talk about it, and here it's going to be. Here we want. I'm using this as kind of the climax here. So this is lines 110 to 111 in the Decameron, where they talk about games.
Right.
So and who the queen on the
Pampania.
Pampania, thank
Yeah.
you, is who's the leader of the first day, the queen of the
Right.
first day. She's elected. Says this: here the air is cool and the prospect fair, and here observe are dice and chess. Take then your pleasure as you may be severally minded, but if you take my advice, you will find pastime for the hot hours before us not in play, in which the loser must needs be vexed, and neither the winner nor the onlooker may be better pleased, but in telling of stories, in which the invention of one may afford solace to all the company of his hearers. What an interesting commentary. So they start off by saying, we have dice and chess. Don't play that.
Right.
Don't do that, because someone's going to be happy that they won and someone's going to be very unhappy that they lost, and we don't want that for anybody.
Right.
Instead, we don't want a game like chess, one of these old games like chess, where someone wins and someone loses. We want to tell stories
Right.
where everyone can partake and have a great time.
Right.
And here we are again. Right. So this episode will be airing 1 week after we had John Peterson talking about his new book, The Elusive Shift, and that is the elusive shift.
Right.
Is the two camps between gamists, war gamers, where someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, like our show that we have on some Saturdays, right? Where someone always wins, someone always loses, versus storytelling,
right?
Where everybody's kind of in the same book and we can all appreciate the story, and the constant wrestling between those two poles in role-playing games and D&D specifically, and as you're the one that pointed out this morning, actually. So here we have D&D, the first role-playing game, which is kind of both.
It's kind of both.
It's kind of somewhere in the middle.
It's kind of both. And
right?
if you think about a lot of the campaigns that we've had, with Paul when we play at Paul's house for his birthday, we're all playing together.
Yep.
And the fact that we're all on this quest together, and there's not really competition between the players. We're supposed to actually work communally, to find the solution to some sort of mystery, that we're presented with, and hopefully all the players will live. So, in some sense, there's really not like a loser and a winner. Like you're not really winning. You're just like solving a problem together.
Yeah.
And at the same time, maybe the DM is going to tell you stories. Maybe you're going to tell stories to each other. Maybe we're going to try to embellish, like what we're doing, and it becomes part of the narrative. So what an extraordinary game that's actually a little closer to what Pampania is trying to tell them. In terms of like feeling good about yourself, like and actually being more relaxing than a war game where there is a clear winner, usually me, and a clear loser, usually you. That's not true. He's still ahead.
Now we are okay. To be clear, we're taping this 2 episodes into Book of War Season 2, and we're currently tied. The record is currently 1-1. I did get the last game, so we're currently even Steven.
Yeah, last season he won, but
in Book of War Season 2.
But it's just kind of an interesting. Again, finding a parallel to what we're doing, today, of just like. I feel like D&D has a lot of storytelling, even if you have something that's a little harsher, and where a lot of players, might die during the campaign. It's still kind of a backdrop of like, a narrative, about a fantastical world, and and again, maybe it's just like trying to solve, some sort of mystery and you go on a quest, so it's closer to storytelling than, chess, right?
I feel that you can put I think there's a dial that you can dial that in.
Sure.
And I'll say, modern like 5th edition style D&D gaming, you just nailed it, right? 100%. Right. It's definitely more about storytelling than gaming. And for me, again, I do like as you know, I kind of like a hardcore game where sometimes sometimes you do lose. It's on the table.
Right.
And for me, like again, when we play poker, as we did in the past, like one of the things that I like to see play poker is learn how to lose, right? To learn and to learn how to recover from a bad beat.
Sure.
Right? I did everything right. I made all the right choices and I got a wrong beat. Like, how do I learn in a kind of safe space to manage my own emotions when I do lose?
Sure.
Because it's going to happen in real life, and I kind of want that in my toolkit to be able to pick myself up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Not that. To me, that's the only reason why I play poker.
Yeah,
the only reason I play poker is to see how my friends perform and to learn better, to me, how to pick myself up in the worst situation.
Sure.
And that's what I personally got out of old school D&D, and that's why that's the lesson that I like to share, to allow people to learn how to pick themselves up in a safer space.
Sure.
Than the kind of scary rest of the world.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you. I think not everybody's gonna have the same desire and the same personality.
Sure.
But I agree with you that I feel games are opportunities to learn lessons that you can apply in life.
Yeah.
But again, not everybody's is gonna have the same goal.
But how interesting is it that here's Pampania, Queen of the First Day in the Decameron, saying, "Well, we have dice, or we can tell stories." You clearly got to pick one.
How about
you can't have both? You can't have both. That would be insane.
And story.
That would be crazy talk. What?
And good food.
You can't do that.
And have a glass of vinegar with it. You'll be fine. A big cup of vinegar. Nothing could go wrong.
For Valentine's Day.
For Valentine's Day.
A big cup of vinegar on Valentine's Day. How wonderful.
I have some here if you want to.
How wonderful. Yeah, well, maybe off camera. Maybe off camera. So I think that's probably a pretty good place to wrap. So again, here we are coming back around to, stories and helping us survive, and games, and we're here once again right at the camera, and it's like, we have dice, you could consider that, but we want everybody to lose. And of course, I remember being a kid, when D&D was new, and people were like, you don't win, nobody wins. What is that? What kind of crazy
game is that?
What kind of crazy game is that? And here we are. So is there anything that so before we wrap up, is there anything that you really wanted to get in today that we failed to hit?
Yeah, I think we actually talked about a lot of the stuff. I had some stuff about pies, but whatever. It's not that important. We can talk about pies.
Future, maybe we'll
do
do
a
that
whole
like
show on
March,
pies.
maybe like around March 14th. We'll do a pie episode.
Well, I mean, the stuff that we really,
or maybe on June 28th on Tau Day, we can do so we get the whole pie instead of just half the pie.
That's right.
Sorry, I cut you off.
That is okay. No, of course we don't have to talk about, post-plague society and how it's changed everything. And that's, super interesting too.
Yeah.
But, I think I got everything, and, do look up the Cameron web.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting project.
Yeah.
And, if you wanted to kind of like get your feet wet and kind of get thinking about that whole time period, that's a really good place to start.
Great.
Yeah.
And we'll have a whole look for all the other links of other stuff that we talked about in the description here on YouTube, and look for Isabel's channel, Cow and COVID-19, the puppetry. Let's survive the plague through puppets that you were doing.
That's with humor. Yeah, it was all about humor. Trying to make sense of the pandemic.
There you go. We weren't even thinking about that coming into the show, but we
exactly
totally did that here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Isabel, thank you so much for spending your time here. What a wonderful way to spend Valentine's Day.
That's right. And now we can have cookies.
Now
and
we can
brownie.
eat the cookies. Wonderful. Awesome. So, all right. I think this is good enough. I think we can have you back.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm no longer disinvited.
Right. Yeah, you're officially re-invited.
All right.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Good job, awesome. So hope we'll have you back, and of course we'll have more Book of War wargaming that we do together on Saturday nights. And I'm sure I'll be talking more in the closing after I bookend this with my framing device.
Yeah, very good.
So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that is pretty good. So that wraps up our Eat, Plague, Love episode. There we go. If you have any other thoughts you'd like to share with us on those topics, please do so in the YouTube comment section. We would look at that. And while you're there, please also look in the YouTube description for a link to dscribe.com, our sponsor for this show. Dscribe are producers of finely crafted box text. They provide short, evocative descriptions to save you prep time in fleshing out new monsters or locations or new spells or things like that. They also have an instant search feature that you can use to find great descriptions for when your PCs go totally off the rails, which we adore and we want. So frankly, we want that. Again, that's dscribe.com, dscryb.com. And if you enter the code WANDERING at checkout, you'll save 10% on any order. And also remember, of course, that you can like, follow, and subscribe to us, the Wandering DMs, on places like YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and Facebook and GitHub. And we have the handle Wandering DMs on all of those sites. You can also get audio podcast versions of our shows on all the top podcast providers and also on our website at wanderingdms.com. And you'll also find our awesome merch store there as well. Finally, of course, thanks to all of our patrons who support us here at Wandering DMs for special events like this and all the other shows that we do. We could not possibly do all this stuff without your generous support. And if you are in a place that you would like to join them, please visit patreon.com/wanderingdms, where you'll find all of our different benefit tiers, like extra chat with us in our private Discord server right after our show and right after this show today, as a matter of fact. This coming week, look for 10 Dead Rats on Thursday. Hopefully, Isabel and I will have another Book of War wargame show Saturday night, we're hoping for. And of course, we are live here every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Paul will be back next week, so please join us both then for another thought-provoking discussion.